Shana Tova, everyone. Before I begin, I noticed an awkward silence last night. Could be you just didn't like my drosh, I don't know. But repeat after me, Yashar Kochech or Yashar Koach, whatever you choose. Yashar Koach. Okay, so that is what you do at the end of the sermon. If you love the sermon, say Yashar Koach. No, but really, if you didn't like the sermon, that's okay. You still say Yashar Koach, like someone comes up and does something. It's better than the awkward silence that I will read into for hours later, okay? I'm good, right? We're good? Okay. All right, Shana Tova. Yes. Gotcha. According to a midrash, at the beginning of Rosh HaShanah, God sits on the throne of judgment, of Din. But as the prayers and pleas and sounds of the shofar are heard on high, God literally gets up from the throne of Din and goes to the throne of Rachamim, compassion. In other words, God shifts from actively looking for the negative to purposely seeking out the basic dignity and decency of human beings. Now, Jewish tradition also teaches that to know God is to follow God's ways. So as the divine moves from judgment to compassion on Rosh Hashanah, we are to follow that model, distancing ourselves from judgment and shifting to seeing our fellow human beings with the gaze of compassion, seeing our shared humanity. You could say, in fact, that this is the work of Rosh Hashanah. Now, some of you might be thinking, this sounds nice, but did God ever have to be a human being in 2024? Surely we should get an exemption this year. 2024. What seems like a breaking point for civil society, with increasing divisiveness and mistrust. And like most of us, all of us, I hope, I am profoundly worried about our country right now. But I worry not only about the outcome of the election, of course, but also whether we will ever heal as a nation and recover any sense of civility in a post-truth and might makes right world. The war in Israel and Gaza has exacerbated divisions in the region and at home, where dialogue between people with opposing perspectives feels increasingly rare. The uptick of anti-Semitism on all sides and everywhere can lead the Jewish community to self-isolate and disengage, which is understandable but unsustainable. But it's an understandable response to feeling attacked. Given all this and more, I think many of us, would much rather stay on the seat of Din, of judgment, than move to the seat of compassion. Yet, you knew there was a yet. Hayom Harat Olam. Today, the world is being born according to our tradition. Today, we cast off the belief, the entrenched belief that what is has to always be. Today, we envision the world we want to live in, and we take actions or consider the actions that would help us manifest that vision. So with the freedom and imagination that come with Rosh Hashanah, I am inviting us today to envision a world of compassion where compassion is the norm. A world where people care about each other, even people they do not know. Full stop. Rosh Hashanah is also a time where we strive to let go of what stops us from being fully present and loving and kind. And I think if we are honest with ourselves, we know that holding judgment and resentment for entire populations and groups of people is not helpful or productive. In fact, it stops us from doing what human beings are meant to do: connect. Compassion, enacted through the practice of empathy, is the only elixir in a world full of division and strife. Empathy, seeing another and connecting to their basic humanity, is what can soften our hardened hearts and free us from rage and resentment. Empathy is the tool that we build trust, bridge impossible divides, seemingly impossible divides, and repair the bonds of community and society. And I know this is not easy, especially in 2024, when we're living at a time when empathy is a scarce and endangered resource. But that is exactly why we need the practice of building our empathy muscles. Because though we might not have control over what other people around us are doing, or even the cultural milieu at the moment, we do have control over ourselves, our hearts, and our actions. So to that end, to build and envision this compassionate world, I'm gonna offer 3 teachings that help us cultivate empathy in hard times. They are also ideas and also practices that help us envision and manifest a world of caring and compassion. And I hope you'll come along this journey today and find something here for yourself. The first is turning towards the other with respect. The second is hearing, being present for the pain of the other. The third is extending compassion freely and without condition. So first, turning towards the other with respect. The central object in the ancient temple was the Ark of the Covenant. And according to biblical descriptions, the Ark of the Covenant was framed by 2 cherubim, 2 angel-like figures. They kind of hovered here. It was above the Ark, between the cherubim, that according to the text, God would speak to the people. Now, the rabbis pick up on a discrepancy regarding the cherubim. In some versions of the Bible, the cherubim are facing each other. Yet in another section, the text describes the cherubim facing away from each other with their backs turned. So on this discrepancy, because of course we need a solution to a discrepancy, according to the rabbis teach when the Israelites were engaged in mitzvot, when they were offering respect to one another, loving their neighbors as themselves, the cherubim would face each other. But when they did not, the cherubim faced away from each other. So just think about that image. What an evocative metaphor for the danger of, and also the potential transformative power of human interaction. I think this is really important to say, that sometimes when basic humanity and respect are not present, when individuals actively target and harm people like me, or like people actively harm people like us, or us directly, it may not be safe to turn toward the other, and that's okay. As the mother of a trans and non-binary children, I know it would be nearly impossible to just sit down and have empathy for the elected officials who legislate against and scapegoat my children. And for many of us, engaging with someone actively promoting anti-Semitism might cross a line. We all might have a line. And at the same time, I want to challenge us not to let the most extreme individuals shut us off from all people with whom we do not agree, with whom we have radically different backgrounds. To not let it shut us off from our common humanity when we can face the other, when that respect or decency is there. To illustrate this, let me tell you the story of Dylan Marone. Dylan is a digital content creator whose work has centered around creating progressive pro-LGBTQ content. And Dylan is also a gay man. Not surprisingly, as happens in the online world, Dylan was bombarded with hateful and often homophobic messages online. Contrary to what we would expect, Marone did something unusual. He reached out to some of the folks who sent him hate mail and invited them, the ones who felt safer, to have a conversation to get to know each other. And he recorded this in a series that is called Conversations with People Who Hate Me. In his TED Talk, he talks about realizing that the people cheering him on already agreed with him and how subversive it was to just speak to people instead of at them. But at the same time, he recognized that opening himself up to someone who said something deeply hurtful or homophobic was scary. So to help him enter into the conversation, Dylan developed a mantra. Empathy is not an endorsement. Empathy is not an endorsement. Wow. So powerful, so simple. And so I want to ask us what it might be like if we took this mantra on for ourselves. You don't have to agree or condone to see another person's humanity, to expand your circle of care and concern. I am especially thinking about our Jewish community right now that is at SAJ and beyond, really globally splintering and in such painful ways. Again, there might be some people that it's impossible to turn to, but there are many others that is possible. And we must remember this beautiful mantra: empathy is not an endorsement. This is no small thing. Remember that according to the teaching of the cherubim, turning to one another with this kind of basic decency that is sadly so elusive today is none other than the grounds for the sacred. For God, according to the text, shows up in the space in between us. Second, hearing the pain of the other. The shofar, which we heard a little bit ago, is arguably the most distinctive feature of Rosh HaShanah. And it is worth noting that the mitzvah, the commandment of shofar, is not sounding the shofar, but listening, hearing the sound of the shofar. And from ancient times, the sages have wondered, what is it exactly we are listening for? And in one incredible and surprising turn, the sages offer a profound and surprising teaching. They say the 100 blasts of the shofar correspond to the cries of the mother of Sisera, a non-Jewish general who was the enemy of the Jewish people at the time of the judges. According to the text, Sisera's mother peers out waiting for her son to return from battle, but as she waits and waits and waits, she comes to realize he is never coming home. And as any mother would, she lets out wails and sobs. And these, the sages teach, are the blasts of the shofar. To this day, when we hear the shofar, we are supposed to let in the cries and sobs of our enemy's mother, also our enemy. Let's let that penetrate for a minute. The rabbis did not have to offer that teaching, but they wanted to make that point. It's beautiful and it's challenging. And you might be asking me, well, okay, Rabbi, how could I possibly do this when enemies feels really real and close to home this year, maybe more than any other year? And to answer this, I want to invite us to consider the model, the human, the being of Rachel Goldberg Polin. Rachel is the mother of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, of blessed memory, who was murdered a few weeks ago in Hamas captivity. Rachel became known for her tireless activism to raise awareness of the plight of the hostages, but I want to say that I pray that her legacy for the future Jewish people is also going to be her tender and capacious heart. A heart that could heal, could feel and hold her aching pain while steadfastly holding the pain of those on quote unquote the other side. For me, one of the most moving examples of this is a poem Rachel delivered at the UN on the 67th day of Hirsch's captivity. And one section reads, "And I know that way over there is another woman who looks just like me. Because we are all so similar. And she has been crying. And those tears, a sea of tears, they taste the same. Can we take them, gather them up, remove the salt, pour them over the desert of despair, and plant one tiny seed? A seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, war, and hope, and see what grows." 67 days into captivity, her son's captivity, she wrote those words. If Rachel, who endured pain that most of us can only ever imagine, could hear the cry of Palestinian mothers, open our hearts a little bit, can we? What happens if we actively listen to the pain of others, even our quote-unquote enemies, or enemies without quotes, as a practice of empathy? What's possible if our hearts were capacious enough to hold both truths? Number 3, extending empathy freely and without condition. That sounds a little scary, right? We'll get there. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE was a tragedy of epic proportions. The sages attempted to make sense of this catastrophic loss by saying that the temples were destroyed due to sinat chinam, baseless hatred. Internal strife, mistrust, indifference left society susceptible to the outside forces that would destroy it. Generations later, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, chief rabbi of Palestine in the early 20th century, offered an addition, a tikkun, to this rabbinic teaching. He taught, if we were destroyed and the world with us due to baseless hatred, then we need to rebuild ourselves and the world with us through baseless love. Ahavat chinam. He saw this as not just a temporary fix, but a way to live one's life. And you might be thinking, this is going a little too far, but hear me out. Ahavat chinam, to me, is not a command to love every single person that you ever meet, because that's not possible, at least not for me. But I think Ahavat Chinam is a stance. It's a practice in which we seek to embody empathy and compassion. It is a way of being in which we say, no matter what the world throws at me, I am going to do my best to show up with love and with compassion. So let's take the example of Derek Black. Some of you may have heard of him. Actually, they go by they, them pronouns, not Derek Black. Black grew up as a child of a former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan and the godchild of KKK leader David Duke. As a rising star in the white nationalist movement, Derek went off to college firmly entrenched in those beliefs. This was about 10 years ago. And the first semester of college, no one knew who Derek was. But after a semester, word got out. And what do you think happened? Derek was ostracized. Yet it was at this moment that Matthew Stevenson, an Orthodox Jew and fellow classmate, along with some Jewish friends, invited Derek for Shabbat dinner. This was not just a social engagement. This was a going back and forth on the principles of white supremacy. Derek would bring studies to support the racist views that they held, and these other friends would dispute it with other studies. Back and forth for 2 years. And after 2 years, Derek renounced white nationalism. Now, Derek's example of change is important, but I want to lift up the ahavat chinam, the baseless love of Matthew Stevenson and those Jewish students. They had every right to disavow this person who held anti-Semitic and anti-minority views, but yet they invited Derek in. They decided to be steadfast in the face of hate, offering compassion and dialogue, and eventually Derek found a new path. And this is extraordinary. Now, if I am being honest, I do not think I would have the sinat chinam to invite a Derek Black to my house for Shabbat dinner. But I don't even know if I would if I was a 20-year-old college student. And I think the world that we inhabit is much smaller than it was in 2013 when this happened, too. But I think we can look at the story of Derek's friends and ask ourselves, what steps, big or small, can I take to live a life of compassion? Can I stand firm in who I am and also open my heart to see the other, knowing that we are all on a path to becoming our better selves? So there's 3 practices for us. And I want to just conclude by saying there is an election coming up in 32 days. There is a war on multiple fronts. There are divisions. So why is cultivating empathy at this moment so critical? Because there will be a day after. Because we want and hope to rebuild our country and civil society, no matter the outcome. Because we have to find a way forward as a Jewish people. And mostly because it's Rosh HaShanah. Today we set the vision for the world we want to live in, and we consider the practices and steps we can take to realize that vision, so that no matter what is happening around us, we can always choose empathy, which softens our hardened hearts, builds bridges, repairs community and relationships, help us do what human beings are meant to do, connect. The world we want to see begins today. So let's get to work. Shana Tova.